it's become...
Right, everybody, thank you. I hope you've all got a drink and we're ready for part 2. So I've got some questions, because it's my event, and I want to ask my questions. So my first question to Claire is, I was quite surprised when I first found out that Claire was a member of the Revolutionary Communist Party for 20 years. What was that about?
Most important decision of my life. Absolutely the right thing to have done. I had every regard for the Revolutionary Communist Party. It taught me everything. How to think. Not what to think, how to think. And, you know, when I went to university, and people will remember this bit, every week there was a general meeting at Warwick University with 1,000 people at it. And in my first year, I sat at the back and kind of watched these arguments taking place in front of me and thought, this is what I'm interested in. I'm interested in politics. And you know, I kind of didn't really know I was, but that was it. And I had a choice of about 10 revolutionary organisations that I could join, because at that stage, that was what politics was like. There was like loads of revolutionary, you know, anarchist workers group, socialist workers group, international Marxist group, etc., etc. And so you go on. And I, you know, I kind of hung around the left, as it were, and that seemed the reasonable thing to do at the time. By the way, I did go to a Federation of Conservative Students meeting, and I never went back. You know, my dad was a voted Tory. My mum was strong Labour. You know, they fought over politics the whole time. My dad was a kind of working class Tory, but then he voted, you know, so it was all over the place. But anyway, so what I'm saying is, I was involved in left-wing politics for many years. The Federation of Conservative Students at Warwick University at the time were noted. They once covered my door in stickers that said "Hang Nelson Mandela." They were that type. You know, a fine tradition. I was no interest in it. I was interested in liberation and freedom, and I was involved in that. Anyway, and they were intellectuals, and that's it. I'm from a Marxist tradition. And somebody just asked me downstairs, not come in now, but you know, why did you stick as a Marxist? Why did you and all this sort of stuff? I mean, I didn't ever, you know, the world changed. We know that, right? And when the world changed and the Revolutionary Communist Party ended, I was no longer in it because it didn't exist. Right? It was as simple as that. But there was a magazine called Living Marxism that then got rebranded as LM. And I was actually asked if I would be the publisher of it, co-publisher of it, when I was having a year off. And I said, oh yeah, because I wanted to do live events associated with the magazine. And LM magazine, which was post-Living Marxism, because anyway, because Living Marxism had gone because there was no Revolutionary Communist Party. The first edition, we got sued for libel by ITN, and then I thought, oh God, that's a blow. And they said, shred the magazine and apologise, and we said no. And I launched a free speech campaign, and I became a public figure through the course of that by accident. I was actually a further education English teacher, and I was taking the year off to do this live events. And one of the things I believed then, I'll finish it. One of the things I believed then was in things like this. I said politics has lost its soul. We were going through Blairism at the time, and I was saying it's all spin. There's no town hall meetings, there's no public gatherings. Politics should be. I obviously had this idea of these 1,000 people at general meetings when I was young, going to trades council and trade union meetings where everything was really lively, and it was just dead. And principle and standing, because one of the things that happened with the collapse of the Soviet Union, I was not a Stalinist, by the way, I was a Trotskyist. If anyone's interested in the finer details, it mattered to me. One of the things that happened with the collapse of the Soviet Union was that Margaret Thatcher said, that's it, there is no alternative. People said it's the end of history. And that was the growth of technocracy. They said ideology was dead. And I did not think ideology was dead. I just thought it took a technocratic form, which emptied politics of any principle, and I decided I was going to try and reforge principle in the public square arrogantly, and that's what I've tried to do ever since.
Where did your belief and your drive for free speech come from?
Well, I think I genuinely think it's because, well, actually, funny enough, I think it might be because I was from an Irish Catholic background, by which I mean that there was always this thing about growing up about in North Wales that, you know, I mean, you know, my parents were in that kind of no blacks, no Irish, no dogs sort of scenario when they first came over and were treated like dirt. And there was sort of sense in which we were outsiders, even though that's a bit overstating it. But, you know, we were Irish immigrant stock and all that sort of stuff. But going to a Catholic school, because Catholics were a minority, you know, in the UK, there was always this idea that they always instilled in us. People think you get indoctrinated in Catholic schools. So weird. The opposite happened to me. Because what they used to say was, you have to be able to argue for what you believe morally. So I just thought that's what you had to do. I just thought, oh, that's what you have to do then. You have to argue morally for what you believe. And I also was interested in liberation theology, which was part of Catholicism at the time, was very popular. That's when I was in my late teens, got into all that. And that was all kind of free speech and fighting for freedom. So a lot of people on the right think that the left are anti-freedom. And as the question earlier indicated, sadly, in today's circumstances, the left are anti-freedom. But historically, it was the right who were anti-freedom. Actually, they were the censors, they were the people who clamped down on freedoms. And it was the left, the radicals, who were the free. So, in a way, I've stuck with my tradition, right? Everybody else deserted it. I mean, you know, not everybody else, but, you know, a lot of people moved away. That's why I refuse to say that I'm not left-wing. But, to clarify, I actually think that that's me being sentimental. Because I'm not right-wing. I'm from a left-wing Marxist tradition, but it's beyond left and right now. I just don't think it helps us. Does it? Really? I don't think it does myself. I think that therefore you're either on the side of freedom, personal liberty, but I am, if you want, an original social justice person. I do believe in social justice. It's just that social justice has been nabbed by the social justice warriors who were lunatics. But that doesn't mean I don't believe in social justice and equal before the law, everybody. Yeah? Anyway.
Isn't one of the problems that it doesn't matter who gets into power, left, right, up, down, whoever, it's the fact when anyone's in power, they want to control speech, they want to control the populace. There's always that authoritarianism that springs into humans, regardless of where they come from. It's something to do with power.
I don't think so, because that would indicate that every single government ever, anywhere around the world, have the same policies, and they don't, do they? I mean, there is a real difference between the political class and their instinct for authoritarianism today than in the past. They actually didn't. I mean, there's always authoritarians in every party, both on left and right historically, but they weren't necessarily the majority. I mean, I've just done an interview with Peter Whittle for his New Culture Forum that's just out today, and he said you never hear the phrase "it's a free society," and you don't. I mean, that used to be the phrase. People would say we live in a free society. Now if you say we live in a free society, they kind of go, "Oh, mad libertarians in." And this is like both left and right in the Lords. We used to be able to say that is censorship and opposed to free speech, and people would say, "Oh God, yes. We don't want to be censors, we don't want to be opposed to free speech." Now if you argue for free speech, they go, something dodgy about her. She's for free speech. Why? She just wants the freedom to spout bigotry. And so I think if anything what's happened is not that there's always been this authoritarian instinct to power, but that power has lost its moral compass. Those in power no longer know what they stand for. They don't have the confidence that they can win the arguments with people, and so their instinct is to not have the argument, to demonise the other side, and to ban speech that they feel that they wouldn't win if they had it out in the open. So I think it's a very new problem.
Yeah. For people who don't know, Claire is the director of Academy of Ideas. What is the Academy of Ideas? Where did it spring from, and what are you trying to achieve with that?
Yeah, so at the end of this libel case, which we lost for LM, magazine, one of the things that happened was that my attempt at creating these public squares and running events had proved to be successful. So even though we were being sued for libel, I was organising these big events, one called Free Speech Wars or something, and one called Culture Wars. I was ahead of the game, by the way, on all this. And one at the ICA. They were all, and they sold out. I kept thinking, God, there's a real appetite for this stuff. And then it was so popular that I decided to organise a series in the summer one year, in the year 2000, which I was trying to look for a title for, and I thought, what title can I use? I thought, some people said University of Ideas. I thought it was a bit dull. So I called it this series of events, which was 6 one-day conferences and events all around the UK. I called it the Institute of Ideas, and this is the year 2000. Anyway, that was in July. In the March or February, we lost the libel case and went bankrupt, which was a blow. But I'd got this events all organised, and ITN, who was suing us, went back to the judge and said, cancel those events because they're all advertised with the word LM. And even the judge, who was absolutely vile, even the judge said to ITN, God, you've had your pound of flesh, you know, go away, let her organise her events. So I organised the events, and they were a massive success. And then some people came to me and said, you know, here's $3,000, here's $4,000, here's $5,000. Set up something called the Institute of Ideas. So I did. So it's called the Institute of Ideas for years. And it was like then events. And then my friends and colleagues from LM magazine, all the editorial crowd, wanted to start a new magazine, which eventually became Spiked Online. But I never wanted to see another publication in my life again, because I had been publisher of a magazine that was sued for libel and we'd lost. And I hated the whole thing. So I said, no, I'm going to carry on doing this. So I sort of carried on. It was called the Institute of Ideas right up until, I think it was 2018. I can't remember when it was, Simon, if you can remember. But anyway, somebody reported us to the... Anyway, basically, you're not meant to use the term Institute of Ideas in public unless you get permission from the Queen or something. Anyway, we'd existed for 17 years, and no one had ever said that. We were registered as a company, nobody cares. And the company, they had said you can't register it as a company as Institute of Ideas, call it the Academy of Ideas. That was even the people, companies have said that all those years ago. I'd forgotten all about that, which is a company name. Called it the Institute of Ideas, and then some, you know, Remainer decided to do us over and reported us. And once it's reported, so we had to overnight, we had a week, we had to change every website. That's why I was saying Simon was involved. We had to change every website, every email, everything from Institute of Ideas to Academy of Ideas. What am I trying to do? That's the most important thing, never mind the history. I'm still trying to do the same thing. I'm trying to build the public square, a more intelligent political space where you can contest ideas without restraint. It's just that free speech has become more important, not less important, and for creating things like the Battle of Ideas Festival, which if you haven't been, you've got to come to, either in London and or in Buxton, because we do it both in October, November, at the end of the year, every year. But we do monthly salons and gatherings and all sorts of interesting things. There's something called the Academy, which is a residential where we go away for 3 days and discuss things philosophically and in a lot of depth. So got all sorts of loads of things. Sign up for the free Substack and you can find out. What we're trying to do is to basically say they won't silence us, and we need to be better informed, not less informed. And we need to have the courage to argue with each other and look each other in the eye and say, that's wrong, you're talking rubbish, without everybody flouncing off going, I find that offensive. Places where you can actually debate. And my main commitment, and I think this is because I was a teacher for years, is really educational, not in the educate yourself way, but is that I am desperately terrified that young people are being done a huge disservice, both through formal education because they're not getting educated, but also because they, as I have indicated, are not exposed to a multitude and diversity of ideas, and consequently only think that the way you have an idea is you have a suite of opinions that are correct and everything else is Nazi. And that means that they're not being encouraged to think. And they either go down a rabbit hole as a reaction, which isn't helpful, and kind of end up in some, you know, because the ones who are fighting back think this isn't good enough, but they end up going a bit bonkers. Or they like, what's that guy who, I can't remember now. Who's the bloke that we're not Tate? Is that his name?
Andrew Tate.
Yeah.
Thank you. Andrew Tate. So I'm not really.
Said that too quickly, didn't we?
Yeah, yeah. You know exactly what I meant. And you know, but it's like I understand it. You know, young men, right, who are told you can't say that, you can't do that. They react by going after Andrew Tate. I mean, the idea that Andrew Tate is an inspiration to anyone is frightening, right? Because he's an idiot. But it's not to say that I want to cause a moral panic around Andrew Tate either, right? So. But what I want is that you don't have to choose between being woke or Andrew Tate.
Yeah, there's a middle.
Right? There is something else out there. There might well be lots of things out there. And the whole history of human development has been that we've created brilliantly fascinating, challenging philosophy, history, ideas, art, science, all of these developments. And young people aren't familiar with them. And they need to read more books. It might sound boring, but they should.
Let's take some questions. First question from Simon,
Yeah.
and then I'll go to the back of the room.
So it's coming back to your opening remarks, Claire, about breaking the language of an elite culture in politics. I'm just using a banal example. Teresa Coffey is organising this campaign against wet wipes and plastic being in wet wipes. But there was a really interesting phrase that she used when she wanted to justify the ban, and that was the consultation is a legal requirement to make sure that we can go ahead with any ban. And that sense of contempt for the public and the elite just doing what they need to do against us is writ large.
Yeah.
But equally, people are totally fed up with that, and totally fed up with being treated as that object of contempt. And you make the point about the Extinction Rebellion, people reacting to that. But how do we kind of break that more popularly? And hats off to you and Nick and others in the room who've stood in elections and trying to break that mould of politics that exists. Is that the way forward? That we have more people standing in elections?
If I knew what to do. I mean, I don't really know what to do. But anyway, just on your... But I think the point you make about the wet wipes consultation is a really good one, because I remember years ago I got invited by accident. Somebody made a mistake and sent me an email inviting me to a pro-EU dinner. And they said they invited loads of think tanks, and I ended up there. I mean, I didn't know, I just went, right? And they were basically having this sort of internal crisis, about 200 people there, where they basically said we've got no democratic legitimacy, because they thought they were talking to themselves, right? Anyway, they then took contributions, so I stood up and I just read out what they'd said, and said, you've got no democratic accountability, right? And they all said, how dare you come here and say that? So I've just read out what you just said, right? And you know, then I you imagine. But actually, one of the problems we've got at the moment is the elites don't feel as though they've got any democratic authority. They've got nobody believes in them anymore, right? And so they have these faux consultations, that's what it was reminding me, where they basically say, we're banning wet wipes, but don't worry, we'll do a consultation so that there's a democratic endorsement for our ban on wet wipes. And we know that they either fiddle consultations, or when one of the things about the boilers thing, you know, what they call heat pump boilers, when somebody said no, you know, I said to the minister, you know, basically, yeah, they don't make your house hot, which is a blow. They're more expensive, they're not as good at heating, and nobody wants them, right? Why are you doing it? And electric cars and the rest of it. And he said, we know we have to bring the public with us. So not like, what do the public think? It's like we have to bring them with us. So we'll do whatever is required. So, the bigger question so anyway, faux consultations. Anyway, I don't bloody know what to do. I mean, you know, I believe that people, you know, in the room represent parties or are going to stand as independents in elections, let 1,000 flowers bloom, I really like the Politics in Pub initiative, which Joan's involved in, which is you get these things springing up, which are attempts at creating local discussion groups. A number of people around the Academy of Ideas work, have local salons that they get discussions going. But that's not the same as having a full-blown populist revolution. And my fear at the moment is that there's a real nihilism. So rather than there being a sort of positive popular uprising, there's a real it's cynicism, but with a nasty edge to it. And people really do believe that nothing's worth fighting for. That's where I think a lot of the conspiratorial thinking comes from. It's like this idea of like we've got no power and they're up there and they control everything and what. It's too fatalistic for me. And that doesn't mean that I know how to change it. And I feel like new generations got to come along and really shake things up. Because the centre won't hold. I mean, it's not just here, is it? I mean, good God, a load of farmers have just won in one, in the Dutch farm.
Yeah.
I mean, what happened there, right? They weren't expected to win for a start off, right? In other words, you don't know what the issues are even that will spring for. I mean, low traffic neighbourhoods I didn't think was going to lead to a massive uprising in the country, and in a way it has. People are not demonstrating on the streets and burning things in France over pension age. It's the rage, it's the frustration, but it's not clear to me where it's going to land. So what I think I can do is create a positive space that allow people to explore this in a more... I keep saying intellectual, and some people think, shut up, your intellectual stuff. The working class got a proud tradition of intellectual, being smarter, better read, and being on top of intellectual ideas than anyone else, right? And I stand with that tradition, which is we've got to be better than them. We've got to think more. And I kept saying it's a hard job. So anyway, I don't know the bloody answer.
I think part of the problem is we have nobody selling a vision to us.
Yes, very good.
Hence why the best that MP can do is plastic and wet wipes. Has anybody ever used a wet wipe and went, I wish there was less plastic in this wet wipe?
Yes, half the Green Party.
No one is selling us a vision that we believe in, that we're willing to vote for.
You're
and
absolutely
fight for.
right. You're
That's
absolutely
what
right.
we need.
Yeah.
Trevor?
Yeah. I can see how it can be confusing to say, well, we don't understand this anymore. The left isn't the left, and the right isn't the right. The right's supposed to be Thatcher, and the left is supposed to be the socialist workers and Tony Benn, and that's no longer the case. We don't understand. We don't get it, right? I think that the reason it's so confusing and people don't get it is because what's happened to the left, right? What's happened to the left is they have switched sides.
Yeah,
It's
agree.
dead simple,
Yeah.
right? The left was, from Karl Marx all the way to the Labour Party, used to be, we are for the working class. 100% for the working class. The workers are never wrong, right? Trade unionists, the strike, the workers are never wrong, right? Now, they've switched, they're with big business. They're with the new generation of billionaires across the world. That's who they're with, right? They're with a big business and big government and big bureaucracy. And the left are all on the same side. That's what's happened to the left, right? And that's why everyone's it's thrown everybody all over the place and people don't understand. Well, that's the way to understand it, right? So I think it does matter, right? I think there is a difference between the left and the right. The right's changed as well, right? The right is basically a dented shield sort of approach now. We're just defended before they completely send society round the twist, right? With all this stuff, this critical race theory and gender theory and all this, that and the other, right? And climate change and all this, right? It's a dented shield, and I think the right are very weak at the moment, ideologically. And I agree with the person, who was it who said, there's no vision. Yeah, there is no vision. You see that I mean, like in
I'll get Claire to come back on that.
Yeah, look, first of all, I don't think I'm confused. I think things have changed. So you've indicated they have changed because you've said the left have changed sides. In which case, why are you calling them the left? That doesn't make any sense. That's why it's an irrelevant categorisation. It doesn't work. On the other hand, you're being an apologist for the right, who have basically also completely collapsed. What I'm saying is, one thing I was surprised about, and I was surprised actually in the House of Lords, was, I mean, there just isn't even any, there's no Conservatives in the Conservative Party in the House of Lords, bar about 4. You know, it's like pathetic. If the right doesn't have any ideological certainty, it actually is the people. You know, if you look at what's happened in this country, and I know you could say, well, the Conservatives aren't the right, because you just end up saying, oh, they're not ours, they're not ours, they're not ours. But the Conservative Party in this country brought in net zero, push green politics. There's two, and gender identity is their big, you know, a major thing, but practically all of it, they have been responsible for. So, you know, this is the right. And the right, even the
right.
yeah, because you want to say they're not the right, and
Be the right.
yeah. So what you're now saying is the right used to be, that's who used to be the right, but they're not the right, and then the left has now become the right, and they've changed sides. So basically, what are you talking about? Why bother? I don't want to denounce my Marxist background because I think it's weak to say, oh yeah, you know, that was when I was young and I've grown out of it. I think it's a pathetic way of understanding the world, and it's also not true. And I've got a lot of respect for the political tradition that I come from. I'm also not prepared to say that anyone on the right is like the devil incarnate and I won't have anything to do with them. That is also pathetic. But the challenges of 2023 do not neatly fit into the left-right categorisation that we have previously organised the world around. Nick is particularly correct and corrected me, which is that what you need are new visions. What the left and right represented were two competing visions of the future. The problem we've got now is no vision of the future, competing or otherwise. And what we need to allow are new political categorisations to emerge with competing visions of the future. It doesn't matter what we call them. That's what democracy is, where you go, that vision of the future is one I've got more in common with than that one, and you have an argument and see which one will win. But you don't have to constantly try and use the old categories. We're trapped in the old categories, but the world has moved on and changed.
Gentleman in front of Trevor with the glasses.
Was that me? Hi Nick. Claire, thank you very much first of all for coming to Manchester. It's really good that you could come up. Pretty straightforward question then. Given that I feel totally politically homeless based upon what you've been saying, what Trevor's been saying as well, how should the House of Lords be reformed? Because I've been sort of overwhelmed by the just sheer number of Remainer Lords in the House of Lords, as far as I can tell, who sort of, you know, prevented a real Brexit that I would have supported, and you kind of think, well, how should they be reformed to reflect, you know, the will of the people, for want of a better phrase?
Yeah. So the House of Lords should be abolished, not reformed. An unelected second chamber is not justifiable in a democracy, in my opinion. You know, and therefore, what am I doing there? And I'm a hypocrite. That's all true, and it is true. Because I had to take a hypocritical position because I believed that, but I was using it as a platform, and that's fine to call me a hypocrite. But I don't think we should have an unelected second chamber that has so much power over legislation. And they do have a lot of power over legislation, but the reason why they have so much power over legislation is not just because the House of Lords exists, but because the House of Commons has lost its bottle. So they rush things through the House of Commons, dump it in the Lords, and they use the House of Lords the way they used to use the EU, which is the government says, oh, well, what happened was it all got amended in the House of Lords, not our fault, Gov. Whereas, in fact, they collapse in the House of Lords. They try and say it's the opposition in the House of Lords forced us to do it. And you think, what, the Lib Dems? I mean, what are you talking about, right? And they amend legislation, or they say there's a, you know, when they, that's the question that was asked about the retained EU law bill earlier, right? they say, oh, it's the Lords having rebellions. Well, no, they can just ignore the Lords. I mean, constitutionally, just ignore them, right? But they don't just ignore them. So what you need is a House of Commons that writes better laws and writes, you know, and scrutinises its own laws because they're the elected democratic. All of this is about the fact that everybody has lost faith in the public. So politicians used to believe that the way that you got power was by convincing the majority of members of the public to vote for you, by presenting their different visions, right? And now they don't believe that the public are either up to the job, they don't trust the public. After all, when they do get the chance to change things, they vote the bloody wrong way. Remember that one, right? And so they've lost faith in democracy. And so what they do is they're trying to ring fence off more and more decisions from public scrutiny or accountability. And the House of Lords is the mechanism for doing that. On the other hand, Gordon Brown's proposal that has been adopted by Keir Starmer to abolish the House of Lords, which on paper I agree with, when you read the document it's terrorising, because he basically says we want an elected House of Lords scattered throughout the nations and the regions, which basically means multitudes of Nicola Sturgeons, Andy Burnhams and everybody else's, right? And it's even worse because that is faux democracy, you know, so that's hopeless as well. So I think get rid of it. Oh, you don't need a second chamber. You have a democratic chamber, and the public are the ones who say you lot are no good and we'll get rid of you. The public are the people I trust. That's not to say that I agreed with the earlier comment that was that Marxists always said the working class were right and everything. They couldn't say anything wrong. I mean, what? Never. Because actually, there's a fight to be had amongst ordinary. Of course there is. We don't all agree with each other, right? You can't just go, oh, you're working class, therefore you're lovely. I mean, that patronising, condescending notion that was. And half the left did that for ages, right? It was just the worst kind of opportunism. What you say is that these ordinary people have the capacity to have an influence on the shaping the future of the society they live in. And it's a scramble and a fight amongst us as to which one we choose.
I think part of the problem also is I don't think our politicians actually believe in themselves. And that comes across all the time. It seems to be, I need to do something. This is something, I'll do that.
Yeah.
And there's no planning, no thought, no looking into the future.
It's nice if there was some calibre. The
Yeah.
lack of calibre.
Absolutely.
Dreadful. Absolutely.
Gentleman in the white there.
Hi Claire, I won't do the mistake I did at Battle of Ideas where I called you Baroness Fox and you admonished me in front of 600 people. There's apparently a limit to your freedom of speech as well. The question I have is, I think a lot of focus today has been on, you know, the elected officials. What I'd like to suggest humbly is that it doesn't matter. And I tell you why, because if we look at our equivalent sister in the West, the US, they elected Donald Trump precisely as a backlash towards all this, for lack of a better word, woke nonsense. And what happened? It escalated. The wokeness exploded. And there is wokeness coming through corporations, media, education, and culture. Those four are the cornerstones. So it doesn't matter who we elect, what the elected official people's visions are, because at the end of the day, they are not the ones who are influencing society. It's the four basically cornerstones that I mentioned. So I suppose to wrap it up in a question is, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, so I think it's too fatalistic, but I'm not suggesting that politicians are the people who run society. You know, they are part of the state, but they're not the state alone. The state is a complicated, I mean, historically, the way it's grown up, the capitalist state, as it were, in all Western countries, is it's got many layers. And we've already seen that there's a real problem in terms of the civil service, and people have commented on that and the kind of nooks and crannies of the way things happen. So when I talked about that maternity bill, that was written by civil servants in the Bill's office, and it was obvious that the minister who was putting that piece of legislation through hadn't noticed the word woman, and, you know, well, he didn't really know that wasn't there either, you know what I mean? So we drew his attention to it because it kind of had slipped in the back door. And the point is that a lot of things happen behind the scenes and behind the backs of people, and there's no doubt, and I don't think that's particularly conspiratorial, that's the way things happen, right? And the cultural turn, the way that politics being replaced by culture, is one of the things that's most depressing, because obviously people don't, it's like after Brexit, right? People wanted Brexit. They had a notion of what that meant. It gave an opportunity. It was a real opportunity for democratic renewal, for changing things. But not everybody who voted anyway, not every person in this country wants to be involved in politics, right? They should be allowed to get on with their lives. But the problem with the culture war side of things is it invades your life even if you're going to the shops and they've got an LTN. It's like you can't escape things. It's like people who want to get on, who aren't interested in following things, it's like they've kind of, it's worse in a way, that they've kind of taken over people's lives in that way. But, having said that, I don't think that means there's nothing you can do. Because, first of all, that's not an inevitability. And that's what I'm trying to say is, I think that historic specificity is very important. So just like we have a go at people who say, pull down that statue because it's like today's slavery. If I walk past that person and you go, don't be ridiculous, that was a different time. When you get frustrated when you're watching Charles Dickens' Great Expectation being modernised in a particular way, and you want to kind of tear your hair out, and you think, what is wrong with you people, right? Also, we can't fall for that trap either. Things change. There are historically specific moments. And things have not always been the same, and they won't always be the same. And so there's a reason, and actually what Nick said then about, and somebody else said about calibre of politicians, and you said what kind of politicians we've got, they're empty and they don't believe in themselves. If you basically said that ideology is dead, and that all that matters is managing and tinkering with the market, which is what happened post the collapse of the Soviet Union, then the calibre of politicians you need are people who can tinker. They're technocrats, right? They don't believe in anything. That's what happened. That's what Blair's revolution initiated, but not just Blair. It was international. So you no longer had to stand on belief. You had to prove that you could. As it happens, they weren't very competent either, but that's not the point. But nonetheless, that was, and so it attracts a particularly dull type of person, doesn't it, right? And people who can kind of present well or spin a story, but not anyone who's got any commitment to shaping the society that they live in. And as a consequence of which, even things behind the scenes start. So one of the problems is the civil service don't respect the politicians. But you can't blame them, even though I think the politicians are useless. The civil service have filled the gap. As it were, they themselves think, God, why should I take any notice of this minister? So they start making it up themselves. So the civil service has gone completely woke. So they basically, because people have to have a motivation to get out of bed in the morning, think they're going to do something. So everybody's looking for a cause. And the obvious causes are the main causes that we're talking about. And that's what happens. People find something to believe in, otherwise they wouldn't be able to do their job. So I think that you can change things, but you do it in public. And the big thing is shaking up the public sphere. The public need to have this conversation in the open. And one of the things that I've quite enjoyed over recent years, and one of the things that Brexit forced out in the public, is that in the olden days, no doubt members of the establishment sat in their clubs, on Pall Mall, and said, those oiks. They're stupid, thick people. And after Brexit, they said it out loud in front of us on the telly. And it's like they've lost all sense of decorum, right? They say things, they're much more, their guard is down. We can see much more what's going on. And that means that you can walk into a bar in the most unlikely place and say, what do you think of critical race theory? And people have a view. There are kind of like Overton windows being moved. I don't mean that we're winning, God, not. But the fact that GB News and Talk TV even exist, and they're mixed bag, both of them. But you've got ways that you hear things in the popular wind. Anyway, more of that, more intelligent versions of that, please.
Let me just comment on that, which would be, one person can change the world and can change the country. We can name these people, Mandela, Martin Luther King, Thatcher. We can name these people. Those people didn't realise what they were doing when they were doing it. It's only with hindsight we look back and go, amazing person. We might have amazing people in this room now who are going to change the world, change the country, but it means those people have to step forward and start doing something, because if we're relying on someone else to improve our life, improve our country all the time, we're going to be waiting a long time. John?
Claire, you've already alluded to politics losing its spirit, losing its soul. One of the things that frightens me, and I'd very much like your view on it, and it definitely terrifies me, is I've got two examples. One, a friend of mine whose wife, when she was signing a nomination form, not being nominated, just signing the form, said the only problem is I work for the council. And another one is a friend of mine who has a person who was going to be a candidate and has stepped away from that because she's potentially at risk against the bank's bribery and corruption policy. And if we're going to be in a country where ordinary decent citizens are frightened even of nominating and certainly of standing for a local council, not for as though politics is to be involved is some kind of dodgy crime, that's a very frightening situation.
Yeah, I think you're right to raise that. I think there's two problems we've got. First of all, it's easy to say put your head above the parapet. It's actually very difficult at the moment to not warn people that if they do, there could be consequences. And I'm very conscious when I talk to young people particularly, and I sort of say fight back, and I think, God, you know, one person, I think I might have written about this recently, but one person actually phoned me up and said, look, we've fought really hard to get you to come and speak at our college, but the thing is, the person who's now leading the investigation as to whether you represent a safety risk to the students at the university is the person I have to apply for my MA to. And they're like 20, and what am I going to say? You know, fuck your MA. No, I said, don't worry, I won't come. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to do that. And I can say to teachers, you should stand up against this. And obviously I do want, you know, the grown-ups in the room to behave like grown-ups, and I want adult authority to assert itself in education. But I also know that the individuals at great personal sacrifice, and we've already heard about what it's like, the febrile atmosphere in professions such as therapy. You know, these are scary times. Right? If you kind of go against the grain, they can do you, right? So there's that. And then there's all these completely ridiculous regulations that exist behind the scenes, which are apparently anti-corruption, right? And recently, one of the, you know, in a debate on financial services bill, it was obvious that the MI5 and all the rest of it, this was open. So secret services are, you know, keeping their eye on who signs what and does what. And this is because you don't want corruption, you know, are you in the pay of the Russians or the Chinese? But the problem is it gets carried away with itself, right? And the next minute, you know, there's all these checks on anyone who wants to get involved in the public sphere on what is effectively their private information, their financial situations. And you think, well, go away and leave us alone, right? You know, people don't want to be exposed to that. So I think these things do have a chilling effect. The only thing that you can say is, again, we need to draw public attention to those examples where I don't mean the individual ones, and we need to encourage each other. I mean, the only thing that I can say to people, and this is what we try and organise at the Academy of Ideas, we've got big groups of students who meet and lecturers and teachers groups and all the rest of it, is a sense in which you create a body of solidarity where you say to each other, we've got your backs, right? And we start to build those networks so that we have the alternative. I mean, I quite like this new Scottish Education Union, which is a kind of two fingers to the trade unions, because it's just saying the Free Speech Union have tried to do the same. You know, it's like where you build new organisations, new networks of people. And just to give a shout out, because John, you know, it is worth saying, you know, John is working with people who are standing as councillors for Reform UK. You've got the SDP as well. You've got independents who are springing up. There is Posey Parker says she's going to stand, you know, against someone, which will be a hilarious moment, but that she's encouraging other women to join in. I think that I'm not involved in any political party or any of these groups. But what I think is that's the way it's going to. I do think that's the way it's going to change. I think more and more people are standing as independents are getting involved and just saying, I'm not going to be a bystander. And that makes it very difficult for them to claim the mantle of having the public on their side. I would urge people to vote, but not in that because the suffragettes died for it type lecture that used to get at school, but just because I really want to screw them over. So, vote for someone that will cause annoyance.
Last two questions, gentlemen, and then Joan at the back. If you can make them short, please.
Sorry, and I'll try.
The thing that I wanted to say about the elected second chamber, the problem is it gives too much power to the government because the way it goes, and then they just take over. If you scrap it, as you're suggesting, you've seen the rubbish that comes through to you. It really does need a revising chamber of some sort. It's a pretty much an insoluble problem now, I think. I reckon we should go back to having the hereditaries again. Sort of better the descendants of cronies than the current cronies.
And Joan?
I'll take the matter.
Yeah, so thanks, as everyone said, Claire, thanks so much for coming up. It's been wonderful, as always. And just for people who don't know, I am a communist, so they do exist still. I think you're right in so many things that you've said, in particular that it's not left and right anymore. It's the population, it's working people as a whole, but we're not one big mass. We disagree, and that's great. But what the vision has to be is, how is this country supposed to be run? What do we want for a future? What do we want our children? How do we use our resources? How do we make our lives better? And how do we look after each other? And what you've described, what you do, I don't think you should for 1 minute think that Battle of Ideas and everything else is just a drop in the ocean, because I have never met anyone who's gone to any of those events and not come away and said they've been wonderful, and they have been wonderful. I do politics in pubs. I'm a big thing about it. We can't do everything, but each one of us can do something. Nick's doing what he does. There's lots of other people in Manchester doing things. There's so much that we can't all keep up with each other. But also, things like the slogan that people rallied around with Brexit was take back control, but I actually think it should have been take control, because we've never, ever, ever, ever had control. I don't think we've even ever had democracy. And I don't think politicians as a mass, individuals yes, but as a mass, ever really believed in it. So we have to make it happen. And it's going to be piecemeal from the ground up, and that's brilliant because we can do it. And one little example, concrete example, a documentary saw, people around the River Wye were absolutely convinced that the water quality is shit, literally, and so they were told that nothing could be done about it. But they actually worked out, they got organised, and they worked out a way where they would record it, working with the local university, and they have got it very clear now that it was really, really bad, and that's not very common knowledge. So I think when you ask the question, you don't know what's going to happen. I think you're part of what's going to happen, Claire. Do you not think that it's not on its own an answer? But what is happening is quite exciting, that people trying to find ways to do their bit, and we don't know how it's going to coalesce. It'll be interesting how it does.
Yeah, it's a good answer to what I was saying. And to tie up the two questions, even though they look like they're not related, the thing about the revising chamber is what I'm saying is that you shouldn't need a revising chamber, because what you should have are the checks and balances democratically allocated in the House of Commons. It's as simple as that. That would give plenty of room for revising badly written laws if that's what you're doing, and this is different to what the House of Lords does. On your let's go back to hereditaries, it did make me laugh, because obviously there is an element of so one of the things that happens in the House of Lords is that the Labour Party always have these big campaigns against the hereditary peers in the House of Lords, and obviously hereditary power is ridiculous. I mean, it's irrational nonsense, right? The idea that you inherit, in that way. I'm a politician because my father was, and so on. But it also is such a sort of complete cowardice on the Labour Party's part to point at the hereditaries. So I always stand up and defend the hereditaries and say they've got no more reason to. They're no more illegitimate being here than we are, right? Somebody just gave us the position, right? At least they've got a bit of history on their side, right? I mean, not because I think hereditary. And then they go, "Oh, you're defending the hereditaries," and you go, "No, you're missing my point." I mean, nobody in that House of Lords is legitimately there. There's a load of bishop. I mean, what are they doing there? What am I doing there? I mean, it's mad. No, but it is mad. And we're legislators. We make the laws of this country. So that's bad news. But Joan, your point is, you try and do what you can. And I made a judgment call and took the peerage because I thought maybe it would give me a bigger platform to shine a light on legislation and to say what I think, which is what I do. And you just try and do what you can. I mean, I'm in a hugely privileged, don't get me wrong. I mean, bloody hell. I mean, what a place to go to work, right? I know that. So I'm not dismissing it and saying, oh, I'm doing my little bit, right? I know I'm in a very privileged position. But all I'm saying is the driver of every change is that you try and change things and that you God, is that a phrase? It's like that meme. You become the change you want to see. I feel like some teenager. But actually, genuinely, you've got to try and do something. Right, but the most important thing to say, and these will be my final thoughts, the main thing that has really killed off political change is not just vision from the top, but is that we no longer believe in human agency. I mean, we basically present, if you think about it, we are told that nature is more important than humans for a start off, right? That everything we've done is destructive and negative. That history, everything that's ever happened historically has been a disaster. We've destroyed, we were racist, sexist, vile, horrible people who, and so on and so forth. So humanity has lost its confidence, even in terms of like animals, you know what I mean? It's like we kill animals to eat them. It's like, yes, we do that. And that's not a bad thing, right? And you can be a vegetarian or a vegan, I don't care. But all I'm saying is that's because humanity is an exception to nature because it shaped nature in a positive way. That's how we don't live in caves. And these are good things, right? This is how we've developed. And one of the things to go on about bloody laws again, the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill, which is supposedly the thing which is going to completely shake up planning and allow everybody to have more, because I haven't talked much about economics, so have a better standard of living and so on, is basically dominated by green peers. I think what they're called, peers for the environment, peers for the planet. God. And they put in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of amendments, which means we will never build a factory, never build a house, never build a road, never, ever, ever, ever create anything. And when I had a bit of a skirmish with the green, and these, by the way, are mainly Tories, Peers for the Planet, but they're all party, as they like to proudly boast. But there's a load of Tories in there. But then the Greens peer, Jenny Jones, said, there is more to life than economic prosperity. And I said, yes, it's called eco-austerity. And that's what they want. They don't give a shit, right? So we want to have more, not sharing, not squabbling over the same size of cake, which is what Liz Truss said. The only thing that Liz Truss said that I agreed with, which is this size of the cake is not fixed. Productive labour over the historical period means that we can create more for less, which means you have more for more people. People do not need to be starving and they do not need to be poor in that way, and etc., etc. But you have to have economic development for that, and that means creating things. It means fighting off NIMBYism. It means not saying that nukes are more important than homes and all the rest of it, right? These things matter. These are the arguments that we need to be having. But what they think is, as a consequence of being basically told that humans are rotten, a plague on the planet, as Attenborough said, a plague on the planet. Humanity. I mean, what a terrible way to view each other. Or we're gammon, or we're deplorables, what you end up with is losing confidence in human capacity to change the world. So forget every change that's ever happened historically over thousands of years in much worse political circumstances than this. We just think you can't change things. And that expresses itself in two forms. If you're kind of young and woke, it takes the form of permanent victimhood. You basically think the only way I can get in on the act is to present myself as a victim all the time. So you've got no sense of your own agency. But there's an alternative to that, and that's conspiratorial thinking, which basically thinks that you're a victim to forces beyond your control. Now, I am opposed to the globalising forces that have damaged national sovereignty, but that does not mean that I think there's a globalist cabal that plans every single thing that happens and we're just mere little creatures underneath it all. Both of those didn't rob us of capacity to change or agency and basically tell us it's over. And it's not over. And it's not over because humans always go, no, I'm not having that. And you have to think about the Holocaust as the final thing. Can you imagine being faced with a situation where a nation state got away with the extermination of a race? And they got away with it in modern Western Europe. And somehow, from that, people joined resistance. The Jewish people who survived fought on. All sorts of things happened. People learned, like, you know what I mean? I mean, that was pretty grim, right? So I know we're facing a hard time, but it's not the gas camps, right? And we've got to pull ourselves together and stop saying, what can we do? Even though 5 minutes ago I said, I don't know what to do. I don't know what party you should vote for, but I don't mean that you should be passively saying there's nothing we can do.
Thank you very much.